Alright, so we got a package that arrived today from DreamWorks RC down in Daytona, Florida. So in this box is all the lights that we ordered for the Viper build. So these are all Unilight systems that we're going to install in the jet. So I'm just pretty much going to lay them down on the table so you guys can see what we're going to install on this jet. And then I'll show you guys how I'm going to install it in the Viper wing and onto the fuselage as well. So let's take a closer look at the Unilights that we got from DreamWorks RC. So we've got all the Unilights basically laid out on the table. We'll kind of go over the lights that I ended up deciding to install on this Viper for the customer. So basically we're going to have spotlights installed on the leading edge of the wing. So these are the T-Fuse white 15 millimeters. So we're going to have two of those, one on each wing. And then as far as for the wingtip, we got our navigation lights of red and green. And then for the underbelly, so this is the dual navigation light, 14 millimeters. So this is going to have red with white flashing strobe. And then we also got the white flashing strobe, also 11 millimeters. And then our 8-channel plus Unilight controller. And then I also ordered a couple of extensions and then some connectors for me to customize the length that we need for the installation, and then the thermal or heat conductive glue that we're going to use to finalize the installation of the lights on the Viper. So let's go ahead and get started with the process of installing all these Unilights on the Viper. I can't wait to see how it's going to look in the end. So let's go ahead and get started with that. Alright, so moving on to the installation of the Unilights on the wingtips. So we're going to install the spotlight on the leading edge, and then we've got our navigation light that's going to be mounted on the wingtip. So for the installation of the spotlight, from where the former is, where the light's going to be mounted to, there is a former back here about 33 millimeters distance from where the opening is for the spotlight. Now the 50 millimeter diameter spotlight by Unilights does have a heat sink that extends out to about 42 millimeters. So what we're going to have to do is cut this in half. So basically I'm just going to take 20 millimeters off of the heat sink and doing it very carefully with a pipe saw, and just cut very gently around the heat sink until we get to as far as we can go without cutting into the wire. So be very careful with that process. And then we're gonna install it into the opening here. So the cutout is about 15 millimeters, about the same size as the spotlight. So it fits perfectly once we have it installed. So I'm gonna get started with cutting the heat sink in half and getting rid of about 20 millimeters off so that it fits properly inside of the former. So I'm gonna get started with that and show you guys how that looks like once we have it kind of positioned and test fitted into the wing. Alright, so we got the left wing on the table right now. I've already installed the wingtip lights, and then I'll just kind of turn it a little bit really quick for you guys and then try to get the lights in focus. There we go. So there is the wingtip light, and then I've already pretty much routed the spotlight wires through the wing. So basically it came in from this side and then basically followed the formers through the aileron servos, through the flap servos, and then towards the leading edge, and then joined the rest of the wires that came out on this end. So the only thing that's left now is to basically take this sheet of birchwood that I painted black, and what I'm going to do is basically cover up those two additional holes. So I'm gonna CA glue that in place, and then mount the spotlight, which I mentioned earlier in the video. I did cut about 20 millimeters off of the heat sink, and then it's just going to slide into place just like that. It's going to stick out just a little bit, and then once we have that glued and set in place, then we put our cover. So it'll look kind of like that. I've already got the right wing completed. I can show you guys that in a little bit once I have this one all finalized and glued in place. But basically that's what the spotlights are going to look like, and along with the navigation light on the wingtip is going to look like when it's done. So I'm going to get started with gluing everything in place, finalizing it, and then show you guys how both wings look like with the lights installed. Alright, so now that we are complete with the installation of the Unilights on the wings, we've got our spotlight installed on the leading edge and then our navigation lights on the wingtip. The next step now is to install the beacon light. So there's going to be one beacon light that's going to be installed on top of the fuselage, and this is going to just be a white strobe. And then for the bottom of the fuselage, we have our multicolored beacon light. So this is going to have red and white strobe flashing. So let's go ahead and get started with that process, beginning with the installation of the top beacon light, and then we'll move on to the bottom. Alright guys, so moving on to the tail section of the Viper. What I'm going to do is install one of these mountable servo connectors by Pilot RC. You get a whole bag of them. I think there's about 10 of them in these bags, and I got them from Banana Hobby's website. They don't cost a whole lot, but basically what I did was I cut out a piece of plywood that's going to be mounted on the inside, so it'll come out to about here, and then we'll glue that in place. And then the mountable servo connector that's going to be for the elevator is going to then screw onto that position, and then that's all you're going to see. Get you guys to see this a little better. Zoom you in here. Alright, so then that's what you're going to see when it's completed. And then what I'm going to do is also paint that plywood black, just to kind of hide that that wood look to it, and then basically kind of blend it in with the fuselage so you can't really tell. So then that makes it look a little cleaner. I'm going to do the same thing on the rudder up here, where I already got a servo wire kind of sticking out, but basically it's going to be the same concept. It'll just end up looking more so like this when I'm done. Trying to get my fingers in there, and it'll look like that. So it'll be a much cleaner look when it's completely disassembled at the field. So I'm going to get started with installing the wood plates, gluing them in place, and then screwing on these servo connectors, and then show you guys how that looks in the end. Alright, so here is one of the elevator leads that I made. It's pretty much almost done. I just need to install the connector that's going to go to the power box. Here is the other elevator lead. All it really needs is just the thermal wire loom over it, and then we can finalize the wiring of the tail section of this jet. So I'm going to get started with that, show you guys how it looks like in the end. Okay, so what we have here is the aluminum spars for the wing vertical and horizontal stabs. So weighing them on the scale, they came out to about 10 ounces. And then what we did was ordered some carbon tubes. So this is 19 millimeters, and then these are 12 millimeter carbon tubes. And we've essentially cut the weight in half for the stabs. So about 5.5 ounces that we've reduced off of the stab. So we're gonna go with this setup on this jet as an upgrade to reduce a little bit of weight and put this in the jet. Alright, so here's a quick shot of the setup right now. So basically we've got the ESC pretty much screwed down in place. I haven't mounted permanently mounted the fan just yet, but wanted to kind of show you guys how the setup is looking like so far. And then I'm just going to put some wire keepers on that on the top of the fuselage, so it'll keep those 3 wires out of the way, and then it doesn't get sucked into the intake of the fan. So I'm going to finalize the mounting of the fan, and then we'll move on to the thrust tube. Alright, so we got the Mylar sheet here on the table right now. So what I did was basically just put a painter's tape on both ends, and I marked exhaust end and then fan end, and then I determined where my center line is. You can kind of see it with I used the fine tip Sharpie to kind of mark where the center line is on this sheet. Now on the manual it talks about your exhaust end should be at 330 millimeters, and then your fan end at 404 millimeters, which gives you about 7 millimeters on each side of overlap. So overall, in the end, you will have about 15 millimeters of slot to adjust your fan end of the thrust tube, and then being able to adjust the exhaust end. Now, when I did the math with this setup, I got some numbers here. So basically, for 100% FSA was about 109 millimeter of exhaust, 95 millimeter or 95% at 106 millimeters, and so forth and so forth. So it's pretty close to the measurements that I got when I measured the hub and the exhaust inlet of the shroud. So I'm gonna go with the measurements from the manual for now, and then I'll just adjust the exhaust diameter as we go along. So basically, I marked out, so from here to here is about 404 millimeters, and then from here to here is about 330. So basically, I'm just going to take my straight edge and I'm just going to line it up. Kind of mark it up right now, just like that. And then I've got a brand new number 11 blade on my hobby knife here, and I'm just going to cut that end off, and I'm going to do the same thing on the other end, and then we'll kind of tape it up and mock it up, put together before we finalize the thrust tube. All right, so now we got the large sheet pretty much trimmed out. Hard to see, but basically I just trimmed out the outer edges, and then now we can just go ahead and roll this up and then get it to the correct diameter for the fan and the exhaust end. Alright, so the thrust tube is now complete. So basically I used some 2-inch heavy duty clear packing tape to hold the thrust tube together. So a single layer on the inside, and then I basically did a couple of strips going down, about 6 strips going down, and then one clear or one layer right over that. Now, as far as the measurement, per manual, 404 millimeters in circumference on the intake side, and then 330 millimeters on the exhaust end. So let's kind of mock it up. Put it on the fan here, fits perfectly on the intake side, and then on the exhaust end, that gives us 100 millimeters of exhaust diameter. So pretty much ready to install this fan and thrust tube in the jet. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that next. All right, so now we got our EDF installed. So there's our Jphobby 120, and then the wire is basically zip tied to the top of the fuselage. So we got a zip tie mount up there, glued. And then forward of that is the Castle Creation 160 amp ESC. So we're pretty much done with the power plant of this jet. So let's move on to just finish it up with installing the ventral fins and then the intake ring, or the intake for the fuselage. And that is going to be a wrap for this build. All right, so I just wanted to show you guys really quick the exhaust diameter of the thrust tube. So it calls for 100 millimeters, and I can see why. Anything bigger than 100 millimeters of exhaust output, you won't be able to fit it. So I think with the calculations that I got from the website, 100% FSA was going to take me to a 109 millimeter diameter for exhaust. But the 100 millimeter from the manual actually clears the former on the back end of the jet. And now keep in mind, we still have to glue on the exhaust nozzle that's going to come out about this far out, and that exhaust nozzle actually gets a little more smaller. So I think this 100 millimeter exhaust diameter is going to work out for this jet, and then we'll just kind of, you know, cross our fingers and see how it's going to perform with that exhaust diameter for this jet. So I'm going to go ahead and button down the fan and the thrust tube on this jet and pretty much finalize everything for the power plant on this jet. Alright, so the last few things to do is to install and glue the ventral fins on the Viper. I've already went ahead and cut out one side and test fitted the right side of the ventral fin. So what we're going to need to do is zoom you guys in a little bit. You can see on the former where you need to cut the covering off and then be able to glue the ventral fins on that spot. So I'm going to cut out this covering here on the fuselage, and then I'm also going to leave about 1 millimeter on the outside edges of the ventral fin, and then remove the covering on the center part. So then we're just going to apply some epoxy on this ventral fin and then glue it in place just like that. And then I'll show you guys how it looks once everything cures and how it looks like in the end. Alright, so the next thing we're going to do is install these intake covers to the leading edge of the intakes. So there's a little bit of covering on the leading edge or the front of face of the intake. So I'm going to cut some of this covering off and then basically epoxy this intake covers in place and then let that cure overnight. Alright, hopefully this is it. Alright, so the last thing we're going to do now is just program our ESC. So I am now on the Castle Creations Castle Link app, and then basically have our USB connected and devices linked. So we got 2 green boxes and it's ready to go to make some changes. So if you're not familiar with Castle Creation ESCs, you can actually program this through the app on your computer, or you can have the field programming card. But I find that the app on my laptop, I have more options to change on the parameters. So if you're not familiar with Castle Creation and you don't know what each one of the settings will affect, you just hit the little question mark there and it'll give you a brief description of what that option does and then what the 3 parameters will do for you. So as far as our throttle response, I'm going to put it at fast throttle response on this one, and right now it's currently in airplane mode, and then the auto calibration endpoints for your ESC. So anything with an asterisk mark, so I'm just gonna kind of point this out real quick, like medium with a little asterisk mark there, that just basically represents whatever the default setting on the ESC was before you made any changes. Next thing we're going to do is check the brakes to make sure that the brakes are disabled. We don't want the brakes to be on the EDF. Cutoff, this is basically just a low voltage cutoff. Since we're using LiPo, it has the auto LiPo option, and again with the asterisk mark on there. I don't really mess with that setting a whole lot. Where I do make a lot of changes on is the actual motor itself. So motor startup at 59, so if not, again, we'll hit the question mark. It's just basically, you know, whatever the startup power you want on the motor. So I'm gonna keep it at medium. I don't really mess with that either. What I do mess with is the motor timing. I set this at low, and all that is the efficiency of the motor. So for best efficiency and then lower motor temperature, you want to make sure that your motor is in low timing. Medium, if you're using pylon racing planes, I would assume. I don't typically mess with it, so it's more for a racing type of setup. And then high, I don't really use, because you run the risk of over temping that motor and you might potentially burn it out. So I'm not really going to mess with that that high setting. I typically leave it at low, and then the next option you have is basically changing the direction of the motor, so you can have it moving forward, or if you happen to have it in reverse when you have all your wires plugged in, you can reverse the polarity of that motor. So right now it's at forward. One change that I am going to make is that the default setting is 12 kilohertz, but since we're using an outrunner motor on a Jphobby fan, I'm gonna put it on outrunner mode. Power on beam is basically it's enabled right now. All that does is let you know, give you a heads up that your aircraft is still powered on, and if you forgot to turn it off,
it'll give you a beep every so often to indicate that the motor is still armed and you forgot to turn off your plane. Another cool option that it has is the auxiliary wire. That is that white wire that is by itself on the ESC, and it just gives you options of what to use that auxiliary wire for. I've used the arming lock key in the past, and then basically with the arming key installed in the aircraft, the motor is disabled. The moment you pull that arming key out, it arms the motor. So kind of safety feature there. Another option that I have used in the past also is the reverse thrust. So if you have an aircraft that doesn't have brakes, you can use the reverse thrust option on your auxiliary wire and then just assign that to a channel. Logging basically has all the parameters that you want to be, you want the ECU to be logging during its flight, and then you can extract the last flight and then check to see how the performance of the aircraft looks. And then the last one is just the software version. So now that I've made my changes to the parameters, all I'm going to do is hit update, and then that status bar will fill up, and then now it's done. So we are now complete with the programming of the ESC.
Alright, so I pretty much finalized it. So how I want the sequence to be on position 2. So the top strobe light is going to flash 4 times. Bottom strobe light, we're going to have 3 alternating white and red. Alright, and then both of our nav lights on the wingtips are going to remain on. So now what I want for position 3 is to have the spotlights to remain on the entire time. So I'm going to switch over to position 3, which pretty much it's already preset that way from the factory on the controller, so I don't think I need to make any more changes to that. And that's basically channel 7 and 8. And if I wanted to, I could actually turn it into a strobe. So notice how the right wingtip spotlight turned on, and it's on strobe mode now. I can do just 2, or I could have it just remain on, and then I could actually just change the sequence of it if I wanted to. Notice how the sequencing of the lights change depending on which one of those blocks I have selected. Honestly, I haven't figured out how to make the sequencing really work out the way. If you wanted to do a special sequence that you want the lights to flash, you just kind of have to just play with it and turn it on and off, and then figure out what strobe is going to be on. But I think for landing configuration, I want the spotlights on the wingtips to be on the leading edge of the wing to be on, and then the nav lights. Who knows? I might even change up the sequencing on the lights on the nav lights. Maybe have it flashing. But for now, I'm gonna leave it like this for the owner and see how he likes it, and then go from there. Honestly, I think we're good with this. Alright guys, so we are officially build complete on this Viper MKII by Black Horse model. As you guys can see, all of the navigation lights are working properly. I actually have my hand on the top strobe light because it's so bright. But just to kind of recap of what we did with this jet, we installed the Jphobby 120mm EDF, and it is an open fan setup. With that, we did save about 6.5 ounces of weight without using the intake tubes. And then along with that, we've replaced the aluminum wing spar, the stab and the vertical stab with carbon fiber rod, and that saved us quite a bit of weight also on this jet. Now another thing I want to point out is the landing gears. After getting the landing gears back from the distributor, they've replaced the trinions. When I got the retracts back, I decided not to install the gear door covers. So if I kind of tilt the plane a little bit, you guys hopefully can see the gear door covers are not installed on this jet. And the reason being is that with the gear covers installed and the mechanism that they have included in the kit, the gear doors doesn't close properly when the gears are up. So I just decided to just not even use the gear door covers and just keep it a little bit more streamlined under the aircraft without those gear door covers. Aside from that, everything is pretty much set up, ready to go. So I'm ready to close out this build and deliver this jet to its owner tomorrow morning. So I'll see you guys on the next build video.